In this episode, I speak with the absolute legend, Rebecca Campbell. She is the author of a couple of little known books you might know called Light is the New Black and Rise, Sister, Rise. She has been monumental in my own journey, finding myself in my early 20s starving for a deeper connection, a spiritual exploration in my life. And Rebecca's work was so helpful, so inspiring to assist me on that exploration into myself. And so, in this episode, we speak about all things spiritual, why developing a sacred practice and creating sacred spaces in your life is worthwhile, and all things around navigating the void, the empty moments in life, the confusion, the lostness. We talk about it all. It's a beautiful episode. I can't wait for you to listen to it. It was an absolute dream for me to speak with Rebecca, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you guys think. Okay, let's go to the show. Hello, Rebecca Campbell. Welcome to the Anxiety Reset podcast. I am so excited to be talking to you.
Oh, so happy to be here with you. Yay.
So, look, just to give you a little context, I was raised atheist and really got to my, early 20s and was like yearning and starving for a deeper connection in life. My heart was just like, there was something empty in me that I needed to fill. And coming across your work, Rise Sister Rise, it was the first book of yours that I picked up, and then later went through to Light is the New Black. Was so monumental in my journey in reconnecting and believing in the stuff we can't see, but we can feel and sense. And so I just wanted to thank you for your work.
Oh, bless you, Georgie. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
And for this episode, I really wanted us to delve into the idea of how we can help women sort of reclaim that connection, that sacredness in life, because I think it's kind of seen as weird or only for a certain type of person. And I just think that's such a tragedy. So I'd love to go into that. But before we do, would you mind sharing a little bit of your story and how your relationship with spirit or your spiritual connection has kind of developed through your life?
hmm So I think, like you, I had that yearning for what I call the sacred. I wasn't raised without any belief of the sacred, but it was more just like my family. Like, I was christened Catholic. I ended up going to a Catholic girls' school, but like that was a bit weird in my family. Like, I went to a state primary school. It was just because it was the school my parents wanted me to go to, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my god, I need to work out what to say in church. um but and there was something about the sacred, as in, I remember seeing like statues of Mother Mary, for example, and I was drawn to it but also repelled by it at the same time. It was this kind of like push pull thing. And looking back, I can see how hungry I was for that connection to the divine. You've got goddess, God, there's so many different names, and the names can't quite describe the feeling. But essentially, what I was looking for was connection. And I think that connection can be experienced through watching the sun rise and set. It can be experienced through looking into your daughter's or son's eyes or your grandparents' eyes. It can be experienced in so many different ways. And of course, there's like spiritual practice and chanting, all of that. That's what I was hungry for. And now, with like quite a lot of perspective, because I got into the spiritual world like quite early on. I had some significant experiences that were quite strange, like they were out of the ordinary, that hurdled me into what I would call my first awakening. Like, really, I mean, I can see them way younger than this, but the first one that I could not explain was when I was a teenager. I was about 14, and I just started getting really into it. I was fascinated and captivated by like what happens when you die. Like, are there past lives? like, why isn't everyone fascinated by babies being born and the fact that we are all going to die? And I get that that's a really scary topic as well, but I guess it kind of shows the fact that I was like interested in that was very weird compared to, like, I was still into, I don't know, talking to boys on the bus and going to parties, but yeah, really, that's what I was like engrossed by. But I never really saw it as like a career. It was just like an interest area for me. And I did feel really weird about it. So I just kind of kept it to myself. And so it was almost like I had like a double life in a way where, it's like I had friends who were like obsessed with like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam growing up. It was my equivalent to that, right? um, and so I began like, I didn't plan to, but when I look back now, I can see like I embarked on a very serious education in what I call now the great mysteries of life, which is the sacred. And it wasn't until my late 20s I'd created very consciously a successful career as a creative director. Classic story, done all the right things, had really achieved a lot. I'd moved over to the other side of the world from Australia to London and reached the goals and da 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 da. And then I could just tell that I had this sinking knowing that this life that I'd very consciously created just wasn't in alignment with who I really was. And maybe that was true always, or maybe I just changed. It's such a changing period if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and now I'm in my early 40s, and God, that's another one. And we're constantly changing, and so yeah, it wasn't until my late 20s that I properly just surrendered to what I had always known. I'd received visions from a young age that I'd be writing books. And like I remember going to my first, my publisher is called Hay House, and they had this, I don't know if they still do it in Australia. It's just started back in the UK and the US, but they had these events called I Can Do It. And I went to them. It's like a multi-speaker lineup. I went to them, one of them, my first big spiritual event in Sydney at the in Darling Harbour. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just knew that that was my path. And interestingly, I've just come back from the States where I spoke at I Can Do It as one of the speakers. And I had this thing of like, oh my gosh, because my friend Angela at the time, who I would go to, I wrote about her in my first book, Light is the New Black. She would take me, she was a lot older than me. She'd take me to these events because I was a minor at the time. You needed an adult to take you. And I remember her whispering to me, like, that'll be you up there one day. And I'd kind of forgotten about it until the other day, walking out on stage. And even like there's all these full circle moments that are starting to happen now, which like these things that felt weird and out of place at the time now are like coming together. Like I'm doing a big event in Sydney with Hay House at the in the very same room that event was. And I worked it out last night. It's 26 years ago. That was like, oh my God, that's enough to make you feel old.
That's so amazing. Isn't it nice when life comes back and gives us the meaning in all the confusion and all the unknown as we're sort of navigating what I like to call the void? It's just like,
right,
nothing makes sense. Can you speak to that, being in that space of confusion and not knowing where to turn next and not feeling like anything's making sense? Perhaps it's the dark night of the soul, or that where
I think that we need to realize, and this I'm saying this to myself as well, because I don't know if anyone ever masters this. We're ever changing beings living in an ever changing world. Like if you look at nature, nature's ever changing. I happen to be on this side of the world right now. The flowers are out, the roses are out, the leaves are out on the trees, but a couple months ago it was bare, like there was nothing, and so we're fine with nature changing, and whether or not we notice or not, but with us it's like where it's like we're endeavoring to be in this full bloom state all year round. And it's just not possible. And I think that when we're trying to cling to that state of perfection, and I think this can be the case like in the healing world and spiritual world as well, you know, trying to like strive towards healing something and being healed. And, you know, I've been captivated by this inquiry of like, what does that even mean? Like, what is healed? Like, is healed, if you were just going to compare nature, I think it's easy to do it like using an analogy. So if you're looking at a rose, for example, is the healed rose the rose in full bloom? Is that it? Like, does that mean that when it's a bud, it's not healed? Does that mean when the petals are falling to the ground in order for the rose hip, the fruit, to be there, is that not healed? You know? And so and then when that then goes and you're in the depth of winter, in the void, I call it the fertile void, where it seems like nothing will ever grow again, where like everything seems dead and barren and like there's no hope at all. What we know is that beneath the surface of the soil in the fertile void, that things have never been more active, things have never been more alive. We just can't see it yet. And we know that, you know, again, like us as humans, we're nature too. And so when we were all in our mother's womb in the fertile void there, and it seems like nothing's growing there, but we know it's like so active as well. And so yeah, I think that if we can look at nature as our teacher, it often makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, so true. I mean, nature is full of wisdom. And it's like, I suppose, I think we often equate healing as like being happy.
Yeah.
And that question of, well, what is happy? And it's almost like the
Mm.
sun being out all the time. You know, the
Right.
grass.
Right. And then if you look at like the world right now, like we know, and you know, not to kind of like hurdle us into this like, oh my godness, but like there's big things happening everywhere, you know? And so is it even possible to get into that state of like perfection and happy, everything's great and keep it that way? I don't think so. That's
Yeah.
my experience. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. So I don't know if you know about the Enneagram, but I err towards like big feelings and processing and all of that. I don't err towards like, oh, everything's great, da 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 da, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we all have our own personality and our own way of kind of coping and dealing with the world and creating and being here in our own unique ways. But yeah, this endeavoring for perfection and everything's great and happy and perfect, like I mean I've arrived, I'm here. I just don't think that's possible. I don't think that's what life is meant to be. And I know that's probably contrary to what a lot of people say, it's just about finding your joy and being happy. um Maybe. And is that possible and sustainable every moment of every day? I don't believe so.
Yeah. And if it was, I mean, it's just not the natural way of things. And so what you're
Right.
saying is understanding when you're in that place of what feels like emptiness or confusion or nothing happening, just understanding that so much is happening. It's just not there. So like in front of you, you can't see it. There has to be
Mm.
an element of faith. And I do want to ask you about this question around faith and like believing in something you can't see.
Mm.
For those who are perhaps listening to this and not as familiar with that idea of feeling and sensing things and just knowing, where can we start to understand what that looks like? You know, building that foundation of trust and sensing and believing when we're used to just looking at our external environment and our practical world and the evidence that's in front of us.
Mm. And do you mean, so I can answer that properly, do you mean like um how to open your mind to the possibility that something else exists, or do you mean like to find comfort in that?
Oh, okay. Maybe both. So
Mm.
opening the
So
mind that something else
I
exists.
think the way to do the, like if something else exists,
Yeah.
I would say that there's so much we don't know. Like, we can't possibly know it all. And I think that when we're trying to just like get everything perfect and right and all of that, we're in our linear mind under the, what I would say, the illusion that we can control everything. And there's various different spiritual texts that speak about, you know, I'm paraphrasing massively, clearly, but it's along the lines of all of them. You can either rely on your own personal will, which to me means like, I'm going to control this, I'm going to make this happen, this is the way it's going to be. So that's linear logical mind. Or you can surrender into the same intelligent pulse that tells the flowers when to open, the seasons when to come and go, the whole planet to spin and beyond, way, way beyond. And so when we're trying to control things ourselves, we're relying on our own personal will, our own personal effort to make things a certain way or keep things a certain way, cling to them tightly or push them away, whichever way we go, versus, whoa, like, what is this thing called life? I don't know. What are these seasons? Wow, I'm definitely going through a change myself. And I personally think the invitation is to find a way to be okay with the change, with the mystery, with the not knowingness, right? And find a way to be able to reach for joy, even when maybe my whole day in life is not full of happy experiences. Like, I think it is possible to experience joy while you're experiencing grief. Doesn't mean that you're happy all the time, but there can be ways to get to joy. Same thing if you are really anxious or worried about things. So I would say I err towards that side of the spectrum myself, because I'm a highly sensitive person. You know, I pick up on things all the time, collectively in the world, with my kids, with my loved ones, with my team, with myself, with my family. And so for me, spiritual practice is a way that, as a tool I use to rest into something greater than myself. So, for example, you might call it the sacred, you might call it God, you might call it goddess, whatever you want to call it. But I'll do a meditation where often I'll lay on the earth, or even if I can't get outside, I'll lay on the ground, and I'll play a music track, and I'll imagine myself being held by the sacred, being held by the goddess, by the great mother, and you can insert whatever you believe in there. And so it's like I'm surrendering to this incredible thing that causes the whole world to happen. Now, I don't need to understand that. And if I'm trying to understand it, I'm going to spin my wheels. There's no possible way that I could understand it exactly, but I can be curious about it and say, I wonder what this is. But so that's how I approach it. But yeah, the great mystery is itself, it can be overwhelming if you look at it, but if you allow it, so it's just like, and I can rest into that because I'm held by that, like all of life is, I think it can help.
Thank you for explaining that so beautifully, because it's a almost cumbersome question to have to answer, almost like explaining these things. But what I've found more and more as I've stepped further and further out of my own spiritual closet, for want of a better word, is that, especially because my work is with women, there is a natural just knowing in pretty much every woman I work with or speak to about this stuff. We just feel it. I mean, we have the rhythms of nature unfolding in our own bodies with our cycles. So, yeah, it's almost like becoming less of a thing to need to bridge the gap between, like, how do you believe in this stuff? It's like, well, just lean into it a little bit more and you'll be surprised what you discover. But in that, we're sort of moving into the realm of the spiritual practice or bringing in the sacred into our lives, what could that look like? I know this is like so much, you've got like a million different ways and tools, but where can we start to explore that a little bit in our lives?
So I think the most important thing is to realize that there'll be some times when um, different practices support you. From my experience, I am a big believer in consistency, and particularly at the beginning. If you're kind of like, if you think about it, like if you want to get like abs or I don't know, big biceps. Clearly, I don't do that, but if I did, I'd go to the gym and I'd work out each and every day. And so the same goes with spiritual practice, but it needs to be bite-sized. So I'd say like you can start with 5 minutes a day if you want, or maybe 10 minutes, I think is a good amount. And so for 10 minutes a day, if your life allows you to do morning practice, that's amazing, because I think how you start your day is very powerful. I'm a mum of two now, and since I had my first, I can't do morning practice because I'm woken up by them. I'm maybe when they get a bit older, I'm in the difficult years. So my morning practice is out the window. So I need to find ways to integrate my practice through my day or through my everyday life, which is an amazing challenge, actually. And I think I thought that becoming a mum was going to really affect my not my connection but the depth of my work, but it's gone the opposite way, because I'm forced to look at the fact that, oh, my spiritual life used to be quite separate from my normal life. I didn't realize how I was like, I'm going to go and do my practice now, and then I'm going to go back to my life. Whereas I've now seen, no, it needs to be woven back together. And I think that's where we're headed. And that's why doing the practice is so important, because you're building up a muscle. So what I'd recommend if for anyone who is like, maybe you're not showing up regularly and you want to again, or if you've never done it before, just choose one practice that supports you. Don't worry about getting it right or wrong. Like a simple meditation's great, but just find out the one that fills you up the most. Because I've got friends who are really big on mindfulness, as in it's all about slowing down the mind and slowing down the thoughts. So that might really serve you. For me, it's more energetic. It's about being held in that way that I just spoke about. So connection with the earth is really important to me, and just like a really nourishing kind of like loving holding meditation is the best for me. I've also loved chanting. There's so many different practices. Often I'll walk in nature. And so it's a walking meditation, but just pick one that you can show up to each day and make it bite-sized. 10 minutes, plenty. But do it consistently. Another great one, if you find that you're in your head a lot and you're kind of going round and round and round in circles or spirals, intuitive writing is brilliant. And so to do that, like if you've read The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron is, I think, the most gifted teacher in intuitive writing, in journaling. But you don't need to read that book to understand what to do. I call it soul inquiry, as in soul, your soul, inquiry, you're connecting in with the wisdom within. So you just begin writing at the top of the page. You might do a prompt like, what does my soul want me to know today? Or what's my soul yearning for? Or you just write intuitively. And when I say intuitively, I mean, you just get your pen moving across the page. It might literally be like, I hate doing this. This is a whole load of work. And, this doesn't work. I'm angry because of this. I want a coffee and I don't want to be doing this. This is stupid. Let it all come out, because what we're really doing with intuitive writing or journaling is we're emptying out what is going round and round and round in our head, the voice in our head, in our mind, so that we can clear it to drop into the voice within. You might call it your soul voice. You might call it your inner wisdom. You might call it your spirit, your heart. Doesn't matter what you call it, but it's that inner knowingness. I have a free program called Discover Your Spiritual Practice, where over 7 days you're sent like 7 different practices. So like if you're like, I don't know where to start, just pick one of them and keep showing up to it. Because yeah, I'm such a, oh, you're gonna have to stop me talking because I'm so passionate about this. I really think that if we show up to it in a practice with consistency, and consistency is the key. It's kind of pointless just doing it once a month, and even just going on one big silent retreat or whatever, and then going back into your everyday life and not integrating it. The more bite-sized you can be and repetitive you can be, oh my gosh, like when you connect in with the inner voice within and then act on it, your whole life can change. Like your whole life can change. It's what has transformed my life the most.
Why do you think it is so transformative in our lives to have that spiritual practice and to deepen that and put the consistency in, the effort in to it?
Because I think that we have been taught, and this is no one's fault, it's just like the era in the West that we're living in, to live from our minds, to live from the external, rather than connect in with what I call the great mystery or the intelligent pulse, that thing I was talking to you guys about. Some might call it God. You don't have to call it God, though. You can call it nature, for example. The thing that tells the flowers when to open, when the daffodils to come before the cherry blossom, before the rose, the thing that causes the moon to wax and wane and the tides to roll in and out. Like we're water ourselves. Like more than 50% of our bodies are made of water. So like how can we not be influenced by that same pulse? And this intelligent force is like captivated humans through the eras, and we have all different names for it. And yet, and people argue about, no, it should be called this, and this is what this teacher meant, and this is where you get into the whole like religious debate, and then people are like, oh, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not about like a right or wrong. It's about going like, whoa, like, wow, there is something at play here. And I believe personally that we, just like every single living thing on the planet, are connected to that. And from my experience, when we connect into our hearts, we're connecting into that pulse. Now, that's not to say that, oh, it's like the spirit is higher than the body. Mm-mm. We receive our intuition through our body. So it's not like we're just, when we're being spiritual, we're denying the body, even though that is what a lot of people end up doing. But it's actually through our body that we receive our intuition. And in the West, because so much has been severed, and so many spiritual traditions have been forbidden and severed, and then it's like, no, this one, don't do this one or whatever. We have not been taught and raised to see the sacred that's here. So, but we all do see it still. So it's not, it doesn't have to be this big weird thing. Like my dad, for example, he would not consider himself spiritual at all. He's still like, he's read all my books and everything. And I'm like, Dad, what do you reckon? When you're dead, you're dead. And he's like, yep, definitely. Like, doesn't believe in any of this stuff that, I'm all about, And yeah, I'll every time I go back to visit him, he'll be sitting on the deck watching the sun rise and set, and in absolute awe of the majestic beauty of this planet. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
They're just different words, So it's how can we really, I think the spiritual practice should be about helping you get to that state of awe. And for me, I've got this like peony now in front of me, which is one of my favorite flowers. It's only available, like, it's only in bloom a few weeks a year. Everyone wants it for their weddings, but you got to time your wedding with the peony season and stuff. When I look at a peony or a rose or so many different flowers, for example, just like my dad with the sun setting, I can't help, if I actually allow myself to observe it properly, I can't help but like exhale and be like, whoa, that's so beautiful. Just like, I've got a 6-month-old, and if anyone stops, not because she's special, we're all that 6-month-old, all babies are like this. If we stop and properly look at a little baby, you enter into that state of awe as well. And I believe that when we're entering into that state of awe, or we're entering into connection with life, with this intelligent pulse that is impossible to name, but it can be felt. And I don't believe there's anyone on the planet who hasn't felt it.
Oh, it's kind of like when you do get into these almost debates or, having a conversation with someone who's completely not wanting to use these words, that's literally all it is. It's just not wanting to use these words to describe the same thing. We're kind of all arguing for the same thing at the end of the day.
It's so true. And it's a really interesting time that we're living in from that perspective, because like if you look at pretty much every single earth-based tradition, and while for some of us with our ancestry, they may not be alive in the world right now, but if you track them all back, it all stems back to nature, you know? And I think that because so much has been severed in that respect, and and then I mean, if you go back, particularly like in Europe with the Roman times, is like then religion is being used to control, and then it just gets messy. And by the way, I'm not against any religion. I am such a believer in, or an encourager of anything that helps you connect to the sacred. Like they're all different ways to connect with the sacred. But we're living in this time where actually the words that we use, they're so important because we're reclaiming and reconnecting ourselves back to this thing that is the most normal, natural thing in the world, and also the most extraordinary thing that we don't have words to put around. And so we try and find these words to put around them in order to be like, yes, that's what I mean. And words are important, but they can't quite grasp it. So like, for example, when I wrote my first book, Light is the New Black, the word light worker, the word healer, more recently, the word mystic, all of them have been such an important part of my path, and being like, yes, that's what I mean. That's what I've always felt. That's what I've been called towards. I am that. And then you use the term, and because the term isn't a normal word for everyone, and everyone's like, me too, me too, me too, then it becomes like this word that like, oh, I'm special, I'm different from everyone else. And then I'm like, actually, that's not true. Like, yeah, we're all unique and special, and perhaps we are all that. And like my friend Annabelle Sharman, I mentored her for her book Future Ancestor. She's an Aboriginal woman, and yeah, her book's amazing. Everyone should read it. She We were talking about the term mystic, for example, and she asked one of her elders about it, and we were debating it because it was less like, yeah, what does this mean, and to be mystical, and da da da. And then where it kind of got to was just like, this is the word that we use in the West to describe, essentially, and these are my words, not hers, the sacred that's already here. So it's like the most normal and natural thing in the world. And it's just like right there, like my dad sees the sun rising and setting, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But then the words are important. And so, and then, yeah.
It's like we can't escape our words. We can't escape our like individual personalities and characteristics as much as we want to. And also, like, I just love that we can easily get caught in this idea of there are spiritual people and then there's non-spiritual people.
Right.
We're all spiritual people. Just some of us use that terminology and some of us don't.
Exactly. And who's to say that I'm more spiritual than my dad?
Exactly.
I'm more fascinated by naming it and working that muscle and being like captivated by it, building my life around it.
Yeah.
But maybe he is doing it just as much as me, but in his own way. Like we've all got, just like the daffodil to the cherry blossom to the rose, like we're all here to do things in our own way.
100%. And hearing you speak about this awe and this wonder that comes through, delving into the mysteries of life, I remember experiencing that reading Rise, Sister Rise, and especially some of the stories you share and the sacred sites that you visit. In fact, to the point where I was so inspired, I went and visited Merlin's Cave, Tintagel, and
Oh,
meditated in there with my mom, and she couldn't stay in there.
wow.
She was like feeling too much coming up for her, and she had to go out. I was like, no, stay with it. So she had all this amazing stuff happen. I just
Wow.
experienced awe and wonder in there. And you know, the idea of these sacred sites has always fascinated me. Do you mind explaining a little bit about that and about what these sites are?
Yeah, so I think sacred sites are everywhere in all countries, all over the world. Yeah, it's interesting. How would I define a sacred site? I think it has a lot to do with the prayers and intentions that people have brought to places, which is not to, like, I also believe that the earth has specific places that are sacred that have nothing to do with us, and we just like can feel it, you know?
Yeah, like the ley
Um,
lines, right?
what's that? Ley
Like,
lines. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just significant, um, I suppose that we're observing it, like, you know, bits of beauty in the world too. Um, but specifically sacred sites, yeah, like when I was 18, I didn't realize it at the time, but I went on a pilgrimage of the sacred sites of my ancestry, like I like all through Ireland and Scotland and like Sweden and a few different European countries. Um, and yeah, I found myself like standing at the feet of these incredible like ancient stones, for example, and yeah, in caves like in Tintagel, waterfalls like Nectan's Glen. And I think that when you go to these places, I think places can hold the memories and energy and wisdom of those who have been there too. So yeah, I think it is a mystery, like what makes a sacred site. But I think that the prayers and devotion and love that we bring to places can be felt and known. So here in Glastonbury there is the Chalice Well, there's a White Springs as well. There's many different sacred sites here, but particularly the Chalice Well, like it's a place that people journey to from all over the world, for healing. It's connected to the waters, like you can see with the well, but it's also the gardens there. So is it the water that's holding the sacredness? Is it the physical place? Is it the fact that it's on a really strong energy line on the planet? Who's to say? Maybe it's all those things, or maybe it was one of those things and then the rest followed. But I think that when it comes to sacred sites, generally, in my experience, I haven't really met anyone who can't feel something when they go to a sacred site. Doesn't mean that they have this like out of body experience or deep into the center of the earth experience that changes them completely. I've got a friend of a family member who came to visit, and yeah, you wouldn't classify them as spiritual at all. Um, but they were healing from their mother passing, and they went to the Chalice Well and they cried for the first time. They weren't able to shed tears until they went there. Now, I think that that was the sacred place that allowed that healing to happen. And you know, it's not to say, oh, and then she heals all her grief. No, it just was like a softening, a holding, that maybe an exhaling that she hadn't been able to do until that point.
yeah, I think what's so exciting to me and fascinating about these sites is the idea that two different people can share or experience a very similar, whether it's a visual, like a vision they have, or a an energy experience, like you said. And in fact, something that you described is a vision of this red cord running through generations of women, And Rebecca, that's come up for me in so many different experiences, seeing this red thread through me, my sister, my mother, my grandmother, going all the way back through the generations of women. And I mean, it's just so fascinating. And it brings me to the topic of women and our experience as female beings on this planet. That we also seem to have a theme of rage that is underneath a lot of our experience. And I've found it is underneath a lot of anxiety for people too. So it's like there is this like bubbling of this energy inside. Is there ever a woman, have you ever met someone who doesn't have this rage inside somewhere?
Mm. I definitely feel like some have it more than others, and that it is, while I think there is a collective memory. I think that individually, like, or ancestrally, there can be more. And then if you do the soul lens, which, like, I do believe that the soul comes in with its own history or memories, or they call it samskara in India. Um, that's layered on top as well.
Mm.
And I do believe that I do think that some people have it a lot stronger than others, just in the same respect of I think for those who choose to and have the privilege of having a baby, of giving birth, of becoming a mother. I have some friends who I don't think you can bypass the initiation at all, but
Mm.
I think that some women uh, step into that role of mother and a lot easier than others, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And one is not better or worse than the other, like, but I think some of us have a bigger have more work to do on the feminine line than others, which again doesn't mean one's better or worse. We just have different work that we're here to do. And yeah, there'll be challenges in different parts of their lives. But I've never been asked in that exact way, and I think if I am feeling into it now, I don't believe I've met a woman who isn't able to grasp that.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. Sensing into that
yeah,
powerlessness as well, that sense of having
yeah. And
the
just
power
just
taken away.
like you know any minority who, like, over time, like my friend Amy just sent me a clip just last night of, it was like, we love Oprah, and like when we were like at uni hungover, we'd watch like Oprah box sets over and over again, right? So we always send each other Oprah videos, and she sent me this really old school one. It must have been, I think it was 1978. Yeah, it was. So it was before I was born, this episode.
Mm.
And is a woman basically saying, how can you call yourself Christian if you are in celebration of same-sex marriage? And Oprah just went for it in such a beautiful, compassionate way that didn't demean the person who asked the question, but she ferociously said, we're all God's children, and my friend is her daughter is my goddaughter, and she's in a same-sex relationship as well. And like, that's a whole nother level. That's something that I have, like, I hold in as her friend, but I haven't experienced that, and so it's in that same realm, like that collective reckoning that needs to happen in many different ways, in many different expressions, for humanity, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose in a way it's like we can all tap into that rage for any human being who's had their rights or their power or whatever it is taken away. We can sort of sense into that just from that's just empathy, I guess.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and then there's the direct experience, which can be can't be felt unless we've experienced it, I think.
Mm,
But I mean, we don't know until we've experienced it, right?
yeah. Yeah. I guess for me it's like speaking to that person who might be like, I don't have any rage, I'm just fine. And it's like keeping it all inside. And deep down, we all have things to feel or things that are there beneath the surface.
It's
Um,
so true. And yeah,
yeah.
like and this same friend, Amy, she wrote made me saying, I actually wrote about this in Rise Sister Rise. We used to, when we were living in London together, we used to um back in the day we got really drunk a lot and then we had this thing that we would do. We'd walk down the street and we'd yell like out these like funny things, but we look back and it was like actually like they're kind of like female things that we were yelling out, like accusational things that people say about women, and we would yell it really really loudly and then laugh because it was just so funny how much energy we had around it. And we
Yeah.
look back and both of us are people who we've both always struggled with very bad period pain, and with like both of us definitely have come in to work on the feminine, that's for sure. And so yeah, but if we weren't on our feminine path and or the spiritual path in the kind of, I just did like those rabbit ears, like in the sense of like the cliched sense, like I'm doing this work and da da da. We probably would have been yelling those things anyway. So you don't have to like know, like be doing it in a spiritual sense to kind of like realize, oh God, yeah, I do have a bit of that rage.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I just wanted to ask you, Rebecca, obviously, I'm curious as to whether this has shifted for you. Motherhood obviously is a huge transition initiation to move through in your life. At this point, what do you feel is your purpose, that driving force in what you do and how you lead your life and your work? Has that shifted with motherhood or has it remained the same? And what is it at this time?
Oh, yeah, it's a really tricky one to answer because yeah, like okay, so first of all, so that's kind of like life purpose question. And what I believe about life purpose is that it's while say for me, my work has been a big part of my life purpose, and naming my purpose of being a writer was a huge part of my path that needed to happen.
Mm.
My soul's always calling every moment of every day. So it's not so much like I've just started a new podcast, and that has been a call of my soul. But that's not to say my purpose now is to be a podcast host and that's it. Like there's multiple ways that I'm being called to express. I'm writing a new book. I'm blah, 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 doing loads of different things. And there's a lot of healing I'm doing in my personal life. And I'm now a mum for the second time. Now I got plenty of friends who like motherhood was like the number one thing that they wanted to do, and like they knew that that was like their path. I never did. I assumed I would, just in that same cliche sense that like most people do because it's what you're told to do. But I was quite scared of going there because I knew how much of a clear soul mission I had in my work in the world. And to be honest, I was really afraid that it would stop me from doing that. I mean, you're not meant to say that, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And then of course then like my son came to me. I was in Egypt, in a temple, in the temple of Hathor. And maybe I needed to have a spiritual experience on a spiritual pilgrimage to be like, okay, I'll do it. Um, But he came and it was like I just knew. And my husband, again, both of us, our non-negotiable was be open to it but not attached to it, because we didn't know. And then yeah, eventually we got to the point of like, yeah, this is part of the path. And my son came, and oh my gosh, like for me, motherhood has been the most initiatory experience of my life, and the most difficult one, and the most amazing one. I think that when you become a parent, you really are all of a sudden so invested in the world, because you're like, I can't explain it, but I didn't realize that part of me was kind of like just a little bit separate from everyone. And then the moment I had my son and my daughter, I was like, oh my God, it felt like my heart was outside of my body, and like everything I had to do. But it didn't mean that what I was here to do changed, but it was like, oh, I'm kind of doing it for them as well now.
Mm.
Not in a sense of like losing my sense of self, even though that does happen, I think, when you become a parent. Um, but it's different from what I'm still kind of getting my head around this, because everything I'd read about motherhood and parenthood or whatever, which is true. I'm not saying this stuff isn't true, but it feels like it doesn't quite explain my direct experience, where it's like, yeah, you'll change as a person, you'll lose yourself, and you're doing all this for the kids and da 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 da. That's true, but it's different to that. It's not just like you're losing yourself because now you're mother,
Mm.
which is true. It's that, like, it feels like you're kind of like, for me, I feel like, again, I can't find the words for it, but this is what I'm trying to write through at the moment. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know if my inability is okay. So in my mystery school, I talk about mystical experiences being ineffable, meaning you cannot put words around it. And if you try and put words around it, what can be felt and known is kind of missed. And yeah, so if there's anyone listening who has become a parent or is considering becoming a parent, or if you don't want to, might make you not do it as well. Like, I wonder if you resonate with that it's not just about losing yourself, because we do know that when we metaphorically die, which is just all what we're constantly changing, just like the flower that we were talking about before, going from bud to bloom to fruit, and then to fertile void, to then live again. And for me, motherhood has been the greatest death and rebirth of my life, but it's different from any other I've experienced. And I still don't quite understand it. But I also know I've now had my daughter 6 months ago, and I know that they have two completely different mothers, because I was a completely different person, and each of them have completely changed me. And so if I was to have another, I'd be a complete, and I don't think I will, because it's a lot of change to happen. And yeah, I really honor anyone who has just gone there over and over again. But we really, these things that we experience, and it doesn't have to be becoming a parent, it can be maybe it's losing someone we love, or watching our parents age, or these things change us. And if those things, like, I've got friends who have been caring for their dying parents, and it's like they've been losing themselves in it, and that's true. And maybe, yeah, they should do things to fill themselves up a little bit more. And there's something absolutely transformative in the losing of self in order for something else to be born, which I don't think is possible to put words around,
Yeah.
or at least not until you've got more perspective and hindsight in it. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's such a honest and full answer to what was quite an open question that you could anywhere around purpose. And really, I mean, some people would look at you and see here's someone in their purpose and you are, but it's also so beautiful to see the malleable element to that too. It shifts, it changes. It's not just like one thing. Like, we've just got to find this one thing and then you're sorted and your purpose, especially someone
It's
who's
so frustrating that it's not that, right?
I
Because that would make life super easy. You just need to find one answer
know.
to one question and then you're done. But yeah, it's definitely not like that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me, Rebecca. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you, and a personal dream of mine to speak with you as well, considering the impact you've had on my life. Before I let you go, can you just let us know where we can find you and any offerings you have at the moment that people might be interested in after this chat?
For sure. So yeah, my website's RebeccaCampbell.me. I'd say the best bit, if you're in Australia, I'll be coming in November and doing a workshop. I think it's November 18. So just head to my website. You'll see all the details. It's with Hay House. I've got a new podcast called Returning with Rebecca Campbell. So you might be interested in that. And then, yeah, there was the Discover Your Spiritual Practice program. If you want to just be like, yep, I'm going to show up to my practice. And so you can get that for free. It's RebeccaCampbell.me/practice.
Amazing. We'll have those links in the show notes for people to find it. Thank you so much. It's been such
Georgie.
a pleasure.
See ya.
I am so thrilled to announce my new book, The Anxiety Reset Method, is now available in bookstores across Australia. It's on booktopia.com and Book Depository if you're international. This book will help you create the resilience you need to thrive and keep that anxious mind in check. Broken down into weekly attainable goals, the Anxiety Reset Method will take you on a journey to show you that you really can master that anxious mind. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.